You need to leave the padded cell. Thank you for joining me. I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor. This is Kingdom of the Logos. Here I'm the pastor at Jolton Church of the Nazarene, and today we're going to have a sermon out of Ecclesiastes chapter 1. In fact, I'm going to get back to being more online, and I want to go through our Ecclesiastes series because the whole book sets up this contrast between the vanity of the world, how even if you have great things in life but you're without God, ultimately that will go back to the grave. Or if you're someone who is rebellious and without God, it goes to the grave. Everything is either part of that beautiful something which takes place in heaven with God, or it is part of the nihilistic nothing which goes back to the void, which you see there in Genesis 1-2. But in our modern day and age, really all of society is crafted to be a padded cell, a place that is super soft, it's inoffensive. And in fact, it's so inoffensive that it's remarkably and outstandingly cruel. We've really come to a place in time where, in trying not to offend anyone, we're not actually talking about life and actually building one another up. So thank you for joining me. Let's get to this. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. So if you pop over to the book of Ecclesiastes, it has this beautiful statement in verse 2 of chapter 1. It says, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Now, in the modern day and age, we tend to think of vanity in some sort of self-absorbed, you go and look in the mirror and you look at yourself and think, look at me. We tend to define everything in the modern consumeristic mindset. And we think that even vanity itself is somehow about ourselves. Everything is defined by me. And to really sin, it's strictly defined by me. And we forget that a lot of things are bigger than us, even bigger than how we understand. Like, we don't even fully understand what vanity is. Vanity truly is emptiness. It's emptiness. It's that emptiness that you find there before God creates heaven and earth. That emptiness which is the bottomless pit. It has no height, no breadth, no width. It's without any sort of boundary. And therefore, it also has no meaning. It doesn't have a measurement of life. It has absolutely nothing at all. Because as it turns out, you actually need boundaries in life to have a meaningful life. You need to have tangible things. Not in the sense of material pleasure, but you need to have limits. You need to be able to see and exercise virtue. God actually gave you hands to go out and do things. You need to actually be able to see, to feel, to go and interact, to live, to take place across time. And all of those are actually a lot more tangible than we give them credit for. It's not a materialistic thing. It's actually just the truth of life. And today we're talking about leaving the padded cell because that's really where we're at as a society. And there's two things that I want you to understand that we must exchange as we get to this sermon. First, you need to exchange the padded cell of this world for the higher nature with Christ. So in that, you have a bit of a prepositional movement. And I know I'm being a little bit pretentious in talking about literary things and, literature and styles of language, but prepositions, that part of speech, to, from, of, for, above, around, they're actually a very, very important part of speech. In fact, as living creatures, prepositions are the most important part of speech. And it sounds like something you remembered learning about in high school English, but actually it's very important to spiritual warfare. You need to exchange the padded cell of this world for the higher nature of Christ. You need to be moving upward. You don't need to buy into a lot of the popular stuff we have in our modern world. It's very effeminate. It's kind of low testosterone, deconstructive, wants to tear everything down and kind of keep you in a depressed, feeble spiritual state. We actually need to be moving up. You need to appreciate that there is a high king of heaven, the Lord of victory, who is the head of all high things, and he made you for a higher nature. You're actually made for a marvelous thing. Life is a marvelous thing. It's a very precious gift. And you've got to be moving upward with that because life, it can't stay static. The idea of having a very safe and inoffensive world is actually to be dying. It's actually to have a very static and muted creation. And the world isn't like that. The world is made as a very dangerous thing. God himself is quite dangerous. And again, when Isaiah sees him in Isaiah 6, you see Isaiah being unmade because you can't just look upon God. The seraphs that tend God, they have to cover their eyes, their feet. Moses, he has to hide in the cleft of the rock because he can't just look at God's face. When John in the book of Revelation comes near the throne of heaven, there's the booms of lightning coming from that. And no, that's not just some poem out there in the first century where John is trying to imitate elements of Zeus or things like that. No, that's actually how God actually exists. Zeus is the imitation. God is the real thing. And even when you go outside and you see the world which God made, you do see that lightning coming around. You do see the powerful whirlwinds. And sometimes God shows up in a whirlwind and says, gird up your loins like a man and give me an answer, for I demanded of thee, because that's how all of life actually is. You don't want a life that is very safe and non-dangerous, because it's going to be a very meaningless life. To actually go out and enjoy life, you're going to have a lot of sorrow and a lot of pain. And as we'll find in Ecclesiastes 1:18, as you increase in understanding, so you also increase in sorrow. And that's actually a beautiful thing. We need to leave the padded cell and learn to live again. We need to learn to feel pain again, because that's actually where we find beauty. Learning to feel pain, learning to see the fine sorrow, is actually where you find beauty. And that brings us to point number 2. Point number 1 of things we've got to exchange today is exchange the padded cell of this world, this idea of everything being safe, inoffensive, and, we're just going to survive. No. We don't want to just survive. To quote the movie Wall-E, we actually want to live. So exchange the padded cell of the world for the higher nature with Christ. And then number 2, exchange the depression of the world for the fine sorrow of heaven. Exchange the depression of the world for the fine sorrow of heaven. And now that's an interesting thing to talk about, the fine sorrow of heaven. We'll get to that, hopefully, if my mind remembers. We've got some sermon notes here, so we're going to try to go through that. So as we talk about this, you have to get your life together with Christ. He will demand that you throw away the dross. That's Proverbs 25:4. Take away the dross from the silver, and a vessel will come forth from the finer. Remove wickedness from the presence of the king, and he can go there for righteousness. You want to get the things that contaminate you out of life, and that's a big problem, right? We're surrounded in a modern world in a padded cell where we're constantly bombarded by destructive things. Modern life is very, very lonely. We're very much cut off from nature. We live a largely inside life, meaning we don't see the beauty of the domain which God actually made for us. We don't go outside and see the beauty of trees and leaves, the colors of fall. We don't see the beautiful birds. We don't see the beautiful animals and the wonders of the sky. We don't see a lot of that. We don't even feel those cool, crisp mornings of winter or feel that heat of summer anymore. We live a very temperature-controlled life, and that's actually a problem, because real happiness oftentimes comes with toiling through the land and overcoming the problems of life and actually accomplishing excellent and worthwhile things for God. We actually were made to do that. You look there in Galatians, and you find 2 interesting things put together. This idea that we share one another's burdens, but then also you must be willing to bear the burden of your own load. So at the same time, we have to be able to pick one another up, but you can only pick one another up if you remember how to pick someone up. In Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 10, it talks about, 2 are better than 1, because if one falls, he's got a friend to pick him up. But in our modern world, we've kind of taken that and turned it into something which is excessively friendly and excessively cut down and neutered, if you will. And we've got this idea of all being warm and fuzzy, and we've forgotten that you actually have to be skilled enough to pick up your neighbor. You actually have to be able to help someone through addiction. You have to be able to help someone out of sin. You have to be able to sit someone down and say, hey, there's actually more to you than your desires and your perspective on the world right now. In fact, you're a lot more complicated creature than you realize it. And where you're at right now is not actually a good place. And I love you enough that I've got to tell you about where you're at right now and then pick you up to go to a better place. Our modern world is really designed in the padded cell to be inoffensive, so much so that we cater to the worst instincts in all of us. Again, this is not just talking about different groups of people. This is talking about every really individual that we find around. And even times in our own lives, we'll oftentimes structure our walk through life to cater and couch to the most sinful impulses, or have them, hidden away, in a closet or a drawer or something like that. We keep the sinful impulse and kind of put it in its corner, and we'll go and talk to it when we have a little bit of boredom, or we feel like we need to go address that. And then we kind of put the righteousness kind of on the furthest distance. And we say, well, when the hour comes that a judge says either denounce Christ or be beheaded, I'll then be faithful to Jesus. If it really gets that serious, or on my deathbed, I'll really address those sins. We tend to have this idea that When things really get serious, that's when I'll pick up my arms and put on the full armor of God and be willing to stand. But when it's kind of mundane and ordinary, I'll just kind of go through the routine. That's oftentimes how we do things in life. And the modern padded cell is meant to exaggerate that to its worst possible extent. You're meant to have this life where you don't really socialize with people. You see them online. You see the people on the television, and they have a carefully crafted and curated version of the world they want you to see. It's very empty. It's not actually real. But you form all of these opinions about the world and feel like you're involved in all these stories and things. You know, you watch the adventure that's on television, and you think that you've gone and you've been a part of that adventure, even though you've actually been on a couch. You get online and you see these debates between people, and you think you've had an argument when in fact you've just been looking at a screen. We live in a life where now a lot of our virtues, our vices, our excitements, our thrills, our feels, you know, the things which actually are haptic, you go out and touch, the tangible aspect of life, it is now put in a false reality. And the real version of life is very much sedated, it's massaged to sleep, and we don't actually interact. And it's a very lonely thing, and it's also prime for deception. You're very easy to be deceived when you're not really living and you're just staying in the matrix all day long. So let's talk about this sermon that I've got before me. I've kind of been going for about 10 minutes. I haven't even looked at my sermon notes aside from the opening thesis. You need to get your life together with Christ. And he's going to demand you throw away the dross and get clean. You need to learn to get clean. You need to learn to feel again. You need to learn to feel pain again. I was talking with some kids today so I'm helping some people with homeschooling. And there's some others around that I do that with too, that are kind of their own homeschooling circle, but you kind of interact with one another. There's some other kids that were talking about sports and things. And there was some young guys, and they were talking about some of the sports they played in high school. And, they were worried about some of them, you might get hurt in it. And some of them had been playing hockey. They'd been playing some pretty serious sports. So they were doing some cool stuff. And they're like, yeah, I don't really get too hurt in this sport that I can't play the other. And kind of this idea that I need to avoid the pain a little bit so I can do something more. That's generally the idea that we have in life. But what we have forgotten is that actually feeling the pain teaches you really, really big lessons. I didn't know this when I was in high school. It took me a long time to learn it. And by the grace of God, by the age of 30, I really had started to have my eyes open to that. You actually need to learn to feel pain if you want to feel meaning. You need to be able to feel pain if you want to feel meaning. You need to learn how to take a punch and get back up. You need to learn how to be corrected. You need to learn how to say no to your sinful side and also say no to other people's sinful sides. You need to be able to stand up and say, I hate dishonest gain. I hate the things that hate God. And we've got to put a line down in society and say no to that. You see, in life, we have to learn to be worthy in every little thing. I love how John Adams, who is the second president of the United States, is a very, very important founding father. John Adams, he writes to his grandsons to be worthy in everything excellent. His grandsons write him a letter, and he never even addresses whatever question they ask him. I have no idea what it is, but he ends up chastising them. He says, you wrote me this letter, which was written very, very well. The handwriting is good. The grammar is good. And I want to know why in the world you've been writing me letters that had poor handwriting and poor grammar before now. Because you've now shown me that you're actually very, very well capable of this. So go on and be excellent in everything worthy. Advance in every worthwhile pursuit. And that's actually what you need to do. And that's not just an American ideal. That goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 4. It's actually the first advice that God sits down and gives to somebody directly that we have recorded, is when God sits down Cain and says, if you do well, you will be accepted. Like, that's real virtue in life. You need to be able to do that. Life is living. James has this written in his letter, faith without works is dead. You are not saved by your works, no. You are saved by the blood of the Lamb, but you are to be working. There is a hierarchy of things. God gave you hands. He gave you a mouth. We don't just sit around and idle and say, well, I guess God will make it all out in the end. You actually are given responsibility. You are made for a glorious thing. But you're a sinner. You're a degenerate, a reprobate. You're someone who's unskilled and undisciplined, and that needs to change, and it can change. You were made for so much more. Everyone out there listening to the sound of my voice has been given the precious talent of life. Our modern world has lied to you and said, being really intelligent is the way that you're going to get really far and be special. No, the way that you actually find understanding in life is beginning with the fear of God, having a love for God, respecting that he is sovereign, that his throne is the only thing on this earth worthy of fear. That is the beginning to understanding. And if you're listening to the sound of my voice, you are capable of that. And you can excel beyond all limits if you will accept the power and glory of God, have fear of him, do righteousness, and hate dishonest gain. Exodus 18:21. All right. The message of our world. When you turn on the television, you turn on the radio, just go out to the store and interact with other people. Go out and look at the ads that you see. So the message of our world has for a while, in our entertainment, at work, at school, any other venue, it formally gave us an excess of vainglorious standards, kind of empty standards. Like, well, you want to have a meaningful life. You need to become a CEO of a company. You need to have all these decrees and credentials behind your name. You need to become the pastor that when they announce your name, they give a paragraph of your credentials and rapport. And everybody looks at you and just with guffawing awe, they just love who you are. That's kind of what the world has told us. Or, you need to be the athlete who's the Adonis. You are the champion and victor. And now, of course, I'm here to say, do become the champion and victor. We actually need to be very strong and excellent in our faith. But the world takes a lot of those things which are actually meaningful and good and then perverts them into their most empty form, where you no longer have people with a lot of credentials because they're pursuing truth, but they just have shiny credentials that people awe at, and it really doesn't matter so much what they say as long as they have the right credentials next to their self, and everybody looks at it and just lavishes at it, and it becomes quite sensational and gross very quickly. Or when it comes to the beauty standards, you look at the people on the TV and you say, oh, well, I can't be attractive enough to get a date. I can't be smart enough to get that high-paying job, or I don't have enough wealth to be applauded and desired. I don't have the celebrity status or whatever. I'm not the best jokester at class to make people laugh, whatever it is. We have the vainglorious standards, and we think that we're not enough. That used to be the message of the world. That was, of course, a ruse to get us to chase down our own destruction by taking certain traits that may have great value and then perverting them into the most empty. And that used to be the general message of the world. However, we've changed. I don't know if you've noticed how nihilistic our culture has gotten. And when I say nihilistic, what I mean is it's empty, it's pointless. It's to just be extraordinarily crude, but also to be very serious and talk real. It's all about having, pointless reproduction, the mating ritual that never goes anywhere. It's all about just low aspiration, low skill, all sensations, no meaning. We're going to have a lot of empty words that darken counsel, just a lot of absolute deadness. It's a totally impotent life that we now live in the modern world. And you see that quite literally. You see that quite physically happening in the world around us, but then you, of course, see it metaphorically as well. And we've gotten to a place that's even darker than the old vainglorious standards, where you at least had like a beauty standard that no one could reach, but they felt, some sort of aspiration when they saw it. Now our role models are deliberately repulsive. Our art is deliberately bad. The hollow trinkets that you would go out to purchase, they are deliberately expensive, so you can't even go out and purchase all the fancy trinkets to pass your time here. And even the friendships and information that we have around us, they're all deliberately crafted to really be as fake as possible. So you think that you're talking to people when you're not. You think that you're seeing the news of the world when you're not. You think that you're being informed when you're not. And you're in a place of ever-increasing loneliness and ever-increasing distraction without ever feeling anything at all. It's just an ever-increasing numbness. You're locked in a straitjacket to stare at it all, and it's totally destructive. It is a padded cell. The modern world lives in a padded cell. In the past, the world would at least reward your obedience with lusty distractions as you waited for hell, but now it expects you to be a debt slave for obvious nothing in return. And it's interesting that, again, all of this is found inside. We're cut off from nature. We don't actually live in the place that God needs us to live. You're inside the house, you're inside the screen, inside the city, and you're of every other place of designated polite society, and it's actually like living in an insane asylum. You're institutionalized. You're cut off from that marvelous domain that God created and made you for, and you're severed from nature in every extent, even your own nature. So we've got to go outside and get away from that. In a way, we should always be grateful when evil is out in the open. So as much as our society has become more sinful, more degenerate, more depraved, openly so. Like a lot of times we used to have shame. Now we've removed the organ of shame, so we go and do our sins in public, and we are quite proud of them. In fact, we just openly call things, the names of sin. We openly call things pride and act like that's somehow not sinful. We're different now. We're smarter, except we're not. We're actually much more foolish. We should always be grateful when evil is out in the open, when the present calamity is obvious. So many times we wish for broken bridges to be rebuilt. We wish for wounds that are mortal to go back to being hidden. We wish to not know. We wish for blindness. And that's a bit of a problem. It is very much a bit of a problem. So let's talk about prepositions a little bit more. We need to learn to feel again and to go upwards toward the throne. In life, we tend to have doubt, but doubt is also a very prepositional thing. Like, doubt generally only goes up. No one doubts that suffering is real. Suffering is something that is low, or generally so. It's kind of a base feeling. Nobody doubts that suffering is real, but they do doubt that endurance is worth it, right? We kind of take the most negative and pessimistic view about things. That's a downward preposition. We doubt if there are any revelations from above, but we then behave like the world would never deceive us. Like there's not any deception. Like I went over there and I chose to purchase that at the store. I wasn't deceived. I formed my opinion about what's going on because I listened to the news and I made my decision based on the information. I didn't just adopt that. We have no doubt that we're in full control of our opinions and minds, but we are very doubtful if there is any revelation from above. We doubt if there have ever been any miracles, and we want to be dismissive of that. There can't be anything supernatural or, metaphysical. That's ridiculous. But then we do not doubt that the world is cold and material. We doubt if there is any value in virtue and valor. We say, all that's not really so necessary. But then we're happy to indulge our taste. We're very quick to have an excuse to indulge our taste. And of course, the bottom of this list is the fact that we happily doubt God while lavishing in things below, right? So doubt generally goes up. It's a prepositional thing. Well, this is another thing about faith. Faith also goes up. But faith is very expensive. Faith is incredibly expensive. It's actually easy to go and lay down in a bed of unbelief. You don't have to put any risks in the world. You don't have to go out on a limb anywhere. You don't have to test any virtues of value. You just don't have to do that expensive and difficult thing known as hope. Hope is a very hard thing to actually have. And especially when the world has trained you to just be soft, that you don't need to have hope. Just if something has made you feel unhappy, then it's their fault. It's the world's fault for being cruel. Well, you know what? The world is going to be cruel. We live in the valley of the shadow of valley of shadow of death, for goodness sake. You don't live in Eden. You don't live in heaven. You live in fallen earth. Or to use the Anglo-Saxon term, Middle Earth. That was kind of popularized in Lord of the Rings, but you find that in Beowulf. You find that in all the old Anglo-Saxon, language. The idea of there being a plane here, Middle Earth, between hell below and heaven above. This idea that you're here in between. You're in the valley of shadow of death. That's what Middle Earth means. That's a synonym for the valley of the shadow of death. Midgard. You live there. You're there. There's going to be misery. There's going to be cruelty. But you know what? If you learn that it's not all just about avoiding the pain, if you learn that says, well, valor actually is worth it, hope is worth it, then suddenly you can start feeling those trembles that come quaking backwards from the throne through the valley, summoning you therefore to it. You need to be doing that. You need to be able to feel the hope again. You've got to learn to feel the pain and then feel the beauty. Faith is expensive. It requires not only looking outward, but it also requires looking upward. Faith requires you moving yourself upward, which means you've got to be skilled enough to do that. You're not someone who currently has skill or courage. That's great. God is going to bring it. It's not going to be easy, but God will come and stand with you. The Lord who came and suffered and died and broke through the tomb is going to pick you up. Proverbs 27:10. When my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will take me up. Proverbs 27:14. I would have fainted had I not believed on seeing the Lord, or the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. God will take you up. He will show you the land of the living. A lot of times that looks like the thief on the cross, the noble thief on the cross, who actually has virtue in his final hour, forsaken by the world, hated, mocked, scorned by everyone around him. But yet he says, this man is innocent, we're guilty. Lord, remember me in your kingdom. What is he saying there? We're in a modern day and age where we really cannot think anymore. We can't understand what people are saying. When the man says, remember me in your kingdom, he's saying, remember me in your kingdom. Take me there. From the valley of the shadow of death, I want to see you in your beauty, in the glory. And he's humble. He's not entitled to it, and he knows it. In that statement, he's not entitled to it, but he hears and feels those trembles through the valley once more. And the Lord says, today you will be with me in paradise. It's painful. You're nailed to a cross. Crucified. The thief there with Jesus. It's a painful place. It's not inoffensive. It's not warm and cuddly. It's not muted. It's not downward. It's incredibly aspirational, and it is the most painful thing you could imagine. But my goodness, when you get on the other side, there is paradise. Faith is expensive. Real hope is difficult. And faith is also at the heart of our motivations, the heart of why we do things. And the first step in being distinguished for the Lord is actually having faith. You need to be someone who is noble. We need to remember those upward virtues again. I love Philippians 4:8. Whatsoever is true, whatsoever is noble, whatsoever is just, meaning what is right, whatsoever is clean and pure, because you need to be clean. You need to have a clean life. That's not an easy thing to do, to get clean. There's so much stuff around us to filth up our minds. We are surrounded by such a grotesque amount of pornography and licentious material that you cannot escape it. It's there. It's even come. We now have an excess of people in our society who want to just teach the most gross and degenerate things to children and expose them to it at all sorts of venues and all sorts of places. Again, from the screens, in the public sphere, it's just about everywhere. You cannot avoid having degeneracy thrown in your face in our modern world. It's very easy to be filthy, and yes, they will contaminate you even if you did not consent to it. That's the power of sin. You look in the void, it looks back at you. Things get in and into your mind. It's hard to get them out. It is actually hard to be clean. It's very hard to be noble. It's very hard to pursue what is true. It's very hard to do what is right, especially when the world incentivizes things which are low. Then also, continuing Philippians 4:8, whatsoever is beautiful, the things that are lovely. Anything that's out there that is commendable, it's venerable, it's worthy of a good report, focus on those things, pursue them. Move towards those things. Build up your character. You can do it, actually. Now, it's going to be hard if you stay in the padded cell. If you stay tapped into all the things the world wants you into, if you're someone who's avoiding pain, you're choosing the sports you want to play based on how much they might hurt. If you kind of have that mindset, you're going to find yourself losing in on the nobility. One of the things which I love about teaching Beowulf is you find Beowulf, the kind of hero that's there in the story, when he realizes he's going to fight Grendel, and he makes the statement, I'm going to fight Grendel with my bare hands. And by the way, I encourage you to actually read Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. He did a translation of Beowulf, and it's remarkably Christian, actually. He talks a lot about God, the grace and mercy of God in there, but the noble hero Beowulf, Beowulf realizes that I'm not going to fight Grendel with like a sword or anything like that. In fact, I'm going to give those over to my boy over here. He's going to keep my beautifully studied sword. I'm going to fight Grendel with my bare hands. And may God judge us in death who is more noble. It's going to be painful. I'm all in. You see, that's the thing, is real virtue requires you to be all in. Real beauty requires you to be all in. Real charity, real love requires you to be all in. They're not tones. They're not tones at all. And you've been chosen for life. Don't remain in the padded cell. You've been chosen for life, so use your life well. And again, this is the great paradox of Christianity. Those who seek to save their life, in other words, those who seek the life of safety, will lose it. But those who seek and suffer and bleed and die for my name's sake, they will find it. You have to be willing to sacrifice yourself to the truth. No greater love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. You have to be willing to do that. You can't do it in the padded cell. You can't do it if your life is trapped inside. In Ecclesiastes 1, verse 14, it says, I have seen the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. I have communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estates. I have gotten more wisdom than all that have come before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Solomon's got it all. By the miracle of God, he's the wisest man that ever lived, and yet he is a fool. Because guess what? There's not enough knowledge on this world to save you. Not enough credentials. Not enough exegesis of a biblical text to make you love it. Not. The old magic of virtue, of beauty, of truth, they're not contained in any of that. They come from God, and you can only find it by going straight to Him. You can have that miracle of all the knowledge and find that it is all vanity. Solomon is telling you the truth here, which also means you can find the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, because it doesn't come from the worldly. It doesn't come from the worldly accoutrements, the worldly entertainment, the worldly, house of knowledge, whatever it is. It doesn't come from any of that. It comes from God, and God wants it to be available to you. Here I am. I feel like I'm sounding like Joel Osteen now. Or I assume. I don't know. I've never really listened to Joel Osteen. But verse 17, I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I perceive this also is vexation of spirit. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increases knowledge increases sorrow. All that's true. Every bit of that's true. The more you actually understand of the world, the more you're going to find out what is written in James, that if you cannot be a friend to the world and also a friend of God. If the world thinks you're an agreeable person, if the world is going to defer to you as an expert of Christianity, the world we live in, the post-Christian, anti-Christian world we live in here in modern America, if they're willing to recognize you as a Christian, you need to check yourself. To be a friend with the world, if the world is going to have a good reputation for you, you're probably more aligned with it than you are God. To be a friend of the world is to be in enmity with God. And as James writes there in his epistle, he says, do you think the Scripture is being vain when it says this? Do you think the Scripture is just being rhetorical flourish? That you can't be a friend of the world and a friend of God? Do you think that you can actually be the wise, man, woman, leader, pastor, that the world comes along and says, yeah, on the news, these people, they get it. They're going along to get along. We're going to have a better society. Do you think that you can do that and actually be righteous? I've got a lot of really, really great young men here at church. They work in a lot of different fields. Actually, I've got a lot that work at FedEx. A guy, Zach, he was actually online with me a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, even at FedEx, you find that as people go up the corporate ladder, a lot of times their soul gets rotted out. Because the more responsibility that we have in life, the more things that you have to us, the more you have to rot your soul out. There's not a field that's exempt from that. The more the world wants to give you praise, the more you may want to check your soul. Again, I'm not here. I can't make a ruling on the soul, but I do know that what Solomon is writing about is true. Everything is vanity. The scripture is true. The more you are friends with the world, the more that you are in enmity with God. But you've been chosen for life. You don't have to live in all that. You can actually go on the marvelous adventure of holiness. Don't remain in the padded cell. Get your life together with Christ. Be someone who appreciates what he has made. Leave the inside and go outside where truth is more apparent. Set aside the dross and become excellent in every worthwhile pursuit. Start small and build up. When you look in the mirror, don't be distracted by the world's vanity, but have gratitude for what God made. You're precious before him. But the sins, your objections, your opinions, your logical arguments, all your petty lust, all of that stuff's actually got to be put to death. The more you give yourself to him, the more he gives your truer self to you in return. You're not worthy of any of this. But yet you are here. You're alive. And you're expected to do things. You were given hands for a reason. You're not meant to be passive and idle. Be willing to go out and feel the pain of exercising virtue. God gave you a beautiful world. Sure, the world's fallen, but the beauty is still there to be found. Don't be someone who's common. Be someone who is distinguished for your King. Exchange the depression of this world for the fine sorrow of heaven. It won't be cheap. And with real understanding comes real sorrow, but that's because of the beauty. And you see, I think that's really what's going on in Revelation 21. Revelation 21, you find that every tear is wiped away. And you see, I don't think that's because everybody has had their mind wiped. No, I think it's because they're in the land of the living now. They now see the goodness. And they now see, because this is the real question of faith, right? Kind of the immature, shallow question of faith is saying, oh, well, how could there be a God if, there's all the suffering? And we forget that, well, you're responsible for the suffering. We cause suffering. We cause suffering on one another. We have been monstrous for a long time. We've entered in monstrous ideas, and they replicate themselves across time. People are abused as children. They then go and abuse other children. We do wicked things. Now, the mature question is actually, is it worth it? You see in Revelation 21, where you get all those tears wiped away, what you find is the reunion of life. And suddenly you realize, oh my goodness, it was worth it. All that pain and death and sorrow, those things of the old world, of the old order, as the scripture says, that all seems so petty and small now. See, I don't think the memory is wiped away. I think the fine sorrow of heaven gives way to beauty. Because joy and sorrow have that you can't separate the two of them. Anything worthy of sorrow is worthy of joy. Anything worthy of joy, well, it can also bring you sorrow. And in this life, inside the padded cell, this inoffensive, politically correct world, there is no meaning in that. There's a floor and ceiling to it. When you can't offend somebody, you can't tell them the truth. You can't build them up and actually take them to a higher place in living. You can't even be honest with yourself. Because you're taught that, you really don't need to experience anything that's painful. Actually, yeah, you do. You need to learn to feel again. There's real beauty out there. The battle against the dark is real. The King is looking for sons and daughters who will stand with him. So stand. Stand. Do not be afraid. Pray for courage. Move up. Thank you for joining me. I'm Pastor J. Dillon Proctor. God love you, and have a blessed day.